watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and one of the things we enjoy doing most is introducing you to the most creative and dynamic men and women on a world Jewish scene, who you may not know as household names, but who are truly helping to shape and guide the Jewish future. And there are few American Jewish leaders today who are doing as much for the Jewish future than my very special guest, Jack Rosen, chairman of the American Council for World Jewry, which assists Jewish communities outside the United States and Israel, and builds alliances to combat anti-Semitism and to defend the state of Israel. Let me tell you a little bit more about Jack Rosen's remarkable career. He's the founder and chief executive of Rosen Partners, LLC, a leading residential and commercial real estate development firm operating worldwide. And throughout his travels, Jack Rosen has met with virtually every world leader you can name and is a close friend of many American political and social leaders. On the Jewish scene, Jack is currently the chairman and past president of the American Jewish Congress, serves as a trustee of the Appeal of Conscience Foundation, is a member of the board of the Hudson Institute, and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was appointed to the United States Holocaust Memorial Council by both President Bill Clinton and President George W. Bush, and was a formal member of the U.S. presidential delegation to the funeral of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Jack was a special guest of President Clinton's at the historic signing of the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty, and there are few individuals on the world Jewish scene today with the breadth of experience and insight that Jack Rosen has. And Jack Rosen, it is a thrill for me to be able to meet you and to welcome you to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Mark, thank you, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You have earned it and deserve it. Can we talk just for a moment about you?
Sure.
How do you get to be Jack Rosen? Who are you? What's your own Jewish background? First, where were you born, and in what kind of Jewish home did you grow up in?
Well, my parents are survivors of the Holocaust, originally from Poland. I was born in Germany in a DP camp right after the war. Came to America when I was 4 years old and grew up in the Bronx, and have lived in this neighborhood, so to speak, ever since.
Were you a Yankee fan?
I was a Yankee fan, and I like to tell my kids that I used to, when I was probably 7, 8 years old, get on a subway and myself and my friends and travel to Yankee Stadium without any supervision, which we could do in those days.
That's exactly right. What was the Jewishness of your home, though?
Well, you know, you can't be a child of Holocaust survivors who came from little shtetls in Poland and not have grown up in a real traditional Jewish environment with all those, you know, surroundings that one would expect. You know, my father became successful after coming here from Germany.
What was his name?
David Rosen.
David Rosen. What did he do?
He was also a real estate developer. And in fact, it was just maybe a half a mile from here that he built an apartment building. And I remember it was the first bulldozer ever went on, so right on Hudson Terrace.
Were you close to him?
Yes, very close.
What kind of man was he?
You know, he was someone who spent a lot of time trying to, you know, develop his business and support his family and make sure that, you know, his children grew up with, a solid education. I went to yeshiva, for the first 8 years of school here. Went to Young Israel Pelham Parkway. But I think what I remember most about my father was how highly he was respected by all aspects of the community, social, religious, and business.
That's lovely.
When I first started in business, I would go into a bank, and the fact that I was, as he was known, Jack Rosen's son, meant a lot.
Oh, I get chills, Jack. That's lovely. That's wonderful. Your mother's name?
Sarah.
What was she like?
Well, she actually still is here in New Jersey, has an apartment in Fort Lee. Typical Yiddish mama, with all the trimmings that comes with that. I don't think I have to tell your Jewish audience what that means.
Right.
But she made sure we ate too much and dressed, with more clothes than we needed, and all those things that come with it.
And you were close to her also?
Yes.
That's lovely. You have siblings?
I have one brother, yes.
One brother, okay.
Younger than me.
Okay. It sounds like you were brought up, if you went to yeshiva, as if you were brought up in some form of Orthodox home.
Yes.
Okay.
We call it modern Orthodoxy
Yes.
today, and that's what I would call it.
Okay, and that's where you're comfortable. You obviously are successful in the real estate business, and that everybody understands what you've done there, and congratulations for the business you've built. But you've also been very active in Jewish communal affairs. What draws you to that, Jack?
Well, when you grow up in a traditional home, and Jewish home, and you live with the history of the suffering, that my parents and family went through, and you're in a home where Israel is always a concern of your parents. Through you learn about that.
They spoke about Israel.
Yes, of course. They took me to Israel, my brother. So I think you have a connection, certainly, to Jewish life and Jewish concerns and Jewish people. My own sort of entry into Jewish activism.
Yes.
Came somewhat by accident. I was lucky enough to have some friends in political leadership in America, and I think that was recognized. And when I was asked to become president of the American Jewish Congress, I sort of thought for a moment. I said, I've spent a lot of years, having dinner with the right people and going to the right events. And I said this was an opportunity to take that platform and give something back to my community, and that's really how I got involved as an activist.
Have your children grown up with the same Jewish sensitivity that you and your brother had?
I would say it's a different sensitivity.
How many children do you have?
I have two boys, two sons, both in their 30s. And they have a strong attachment to Jewish life and a strong attachment to Israel. But it doesn't come with the same concerns that we had growing up. They didn't experience anti-Semitism because they didn't have to grow up in neighborhoods where they would have had to touch on that. I still recall as a young child, I spent a summer in Youngstown, Ohio, because that's where my aunt lived, and the young boys there would once in a while decide to make anti-Semitic remarks, and at times there was some fighting with them. Our children today, those children that grow up in neighborhoods like the areas surrounding New York, I don't think they touch upon anti-Semitism. I don't think that they understand the concern of the security of the state of Israel to the same degree. They grew up at a time where Israel was a mighty country, both militarily, economically. We grew up at a time where we saw some wars and we worried about whether America would support Israel or not. So the sensitivity is different, although I think the attachment is certainly strong.
In some way, they are representative of their generation. The entire generation that follows ours, as you say, they never lived in a world without Israel. And some of the things you mentioned, not having to face anti-Semitism, not understanding why Israel was a miracle in its birth, not having to deal with the struggle of Soviet Jewry and the thrill of seeing Jews come out of the former Soviet Union and Sharansky walk across the bridge. There are not the same emotional experiences which you and your colleagues and your generation experienced. And sometimes I think American Jewish leadership doesn't understand that the generation that follows us is of a different world.
Well, I will tell you that I, very early on after, my first son and second son were born, I went out of my way to make sure that they touched on my own parents' experiences and traditions. I made sure that they went to shul with my father, not only Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but other times as well. And I made sure that they spent time at a Passover Seder with my father, because I realized that I myself couldn't necessarily transfer, that same, sense of history, that same culture. We are still Americans now as opposed to Europeans, as my parents were. But I couldn't transfer that effectively, and I was always fearful that that would get lost. And so I went out of my way to make sure they touched on that in ways, and that worked quite well. In fact, I always tell people that, they knew more about my parents' experience during the Holocaust than I did. Oh, interesting. We always, like to say that our parents, often didn't want to see us suffer the pain of hearing those stories, and it was incredible to me. But in recent years, I found that they knew more details than I did. My parents were willing to tell them the story. So I think, you say Jewish leaders don't understand it. I think they understand it. I just don't know that they've used the proper tools, although it certainly is very difficult today, but use the proper tools to engage children today in those, that rich history that we have. It's caused, I think, a lack of interest on the part of young Jews in Israel and some of our issues.
Even in Israel, by the way.
Even in Israel.
How much do you worry, if you do, about the future of American Jewry?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that we will lose so many young, American Jews, whether they assimilate too much, intermarriage. On the other hand, I think we will continue to grow and expand. The Orthodox community is. We will find cycles where I think touching upon our rich heritage and our religion will come back. But at the same time, we live in a new world, and we're not going to. Our community will not, be able to, unfortunately. Go through the kind of assimilations that all minorities and communities and religious communities go through, and
Are you a grandfather yet?
I am a grandfather of 5 boys.
That's wow, what a mazel tov. So in essence, you understand you are now playing the role your father played for your sons.
In a way, yes.
Why in a way, Jack?
My father had to struggle to make sure that there was security for his family and a solid education for his family. I don't think that I necessarily have to worry about that as much. Not because of my own success. I think as a community we don't have to worry about it as much. America today is not the America of the 50s, and so, I think at least there's a solid platform for my boys to grow up as Jews in America. We've won a lot of battles in America that, took place in the 50s and 60s, and wasn't only Russian Jewry. It was about, what kind of school you can get into and, what kind of job you can get afterwards.
Absolutely right.
So I think that, what my parents' generation did, and I think to some extent our generation has done, is provide a secure platform. You know, I've been saying for a while that I think one of the you know, things that I'm critical of Jewish leadership in America is that they don't necessarily, you know, pursue their activism by understanding that the real job today in America is maintaining our standing as American citizens and maintaining, you know, all the achievements and of freedoms that we've been able to accomplish in that long struggle. So many activists today continue to fight the same old battle of the last 30 years. And that's what I really mean about my children. I don't think we need to any longer worry as much about being a secure citizen in America.
I agree 100%.
Which my parents and your parents had to do.
But that's not why you brought your children to your father. You brought your children to your father because you hoped he would enable them to touch a sense of Yiddishkeit that you might not be able to present to your children. And now your sons have children that they're bringing to their grandfather, who is you. And I'm wondering whether your sons, do you think, are hoping that their father, the grandfather of their children, will also be able to give to the grandchildren something the parents, your sons, can't give.
On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the shul that we go to,
Which is?
Park East Synagogue,
Okay. Manhattan.
Manhattan. You probably had Rabbi Schneier on your show.
We have many times.
My two boys join me, and my 4 grandchildren, one of them's too small, join me.
Wonderful.
And many people observe that they are, you know, that our family, one of the few families where little children come to sit, you know, in the synagogue and you know, and participate.
Isn't that thrilling for you?
Yes, and that's what I said before. I think that, you know, the problem isn't so much whether, you know, a different generation of Jews had to transfer that Jewish tradition to a new generation. I mean, we've been around for thousands of years, and we've been able to do that. And over the course of those years, certainly, you know, there have been transitions in traditions, our culture, and I think the question is whether, you know, our generation today, in this American society, is concerned enough and wants to work hard enough at using the kinds of tools that our parents' generation wanted to use and worked hard to use to maintain that Jewish bond and Jewish tradition, to Yiddishkeit, as you call it. And I think that's my big concern of our community today. Not so much that, you know, the numbers may go up or down, or, you know, but have we become comfortable enough as Jews in America to where we can not, you know, want to work hard to maintain those connections of our traditions, to make sure that, you know, our grandchildren touch on that, to come to shul and actually be part of a service and not just come to shul to go to a little children's, you know, show on the side. I always talk about that actually in my shul, because you don't see children today, you know, in the synagogue. They've got a children's program. You know, I grew up in the Bronx and Young Israel, Pelham Parkway, and you know, we were there. We had to sit there, and we had to daven a little bit. We had to, you know, sing along a little bit. And today, the children, you know, what parents tend to do is take their children and, you know, send them to a children's program. It's sort of more enjoyable. I don't think we're using tools right.
Okay, I want to switch gears now. Am I correct that you have personally met with a number of Arab leaders, including that you have met personally with Hosni Mubarak?
I have.
Okay. What's your sense here? How have you reacted to what is being called this democratic revolution that we're told is sweeping the Arab world, beginning in Tunisia and then going to Egypt, and even as we're meeting today, there all news out of Bahrain. My question for you is, when you see this, do you immediately say to yourself, aha, this is intrinsically a democratic revolution from within the Arab world? Or is it something else? Is it perhaps more of people who are very upset with the ruling elite, whoever that power is, simply wanting to change that power, but not necessarily doing so out of the desire for Western democracy. How do you in general react to this entire upheaval in the Arab world?
Well, first let me say, I mean, this is a historic moment because I think it is the beginning of a struggle for the future of the Middle East. And in a way, it'll define the future of the State of Israel and the relations that the State of Israel may or may not have with its neighbors. When you ask this question of, is it about, the citizens of Egypt, beginning a process of democracy, something that they don't really understand very well. I think there are two different, Middle Easts. One is the Middle East of Egypt that has institutions in place and a secular history, and I think that comes much closer to a population that at least understands what freedom might mean. And what self-respect there may be to controlling their own destiny, and what tyrannical leaders might or might not be. Then I think you have a different Middle East, which is a Middle East that is usually led by monarchies, which I think has a totally different culture. And I don't know that we're going to see this democracy process necessarily evolve there as easily and as fast as we saw in Egypt. But the question really is, this is the first step. Can the Egyptians, Tunisians, form institutions, civil society, that will allow them to become democracies in the future?
What's your instinct?
If I look at the history, Iran and Lebanon, I will tell you instinctively that it can't happen, that the Muslim Brotherhood, who have spent many years in a political environment, those kinds of forces will take over. On the other hand, I think it's important to understand that, for Israel to have a long-standing peace in the Middle East, it needs democracy, or it needs, countries that are democratic. Making deals with one dictator at a time and one monarch at a time is short-lived. You need to make peace with the people of that region. And without a democracy, you can't really communicate and have a dialogue and really form a bond with the people. It'll take a long time. But democracy, hopefully, if it could take root in the Middle East, will allow for an openness, allow for people to understand what Israel means, what the Jewish people mean, and so it'll take long to take root. But this is the hope of that I hope we all have to pursue.
But I hear you're saying two different things at the same time. Short term, you are not optimistic. You seem to be saying that if this occurs over a long enough period of time, you're hoping that people like the Egyptians can, in fact, become comfortable with real democratic institutions. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think what I'm trying to say is, in a short-term fix, I think we all may have preferred a Mubarak in Egypt. He maintained the peace. In a long-term fix, we needed Egyptians as a nation to want to have peace with Israel. Mubarak needed peace so he could get American aid, so he doesn't have to engage in war. The people of Egypt need to make that decision, I think, in the long run, that they want peace with Israel, and that will come about in a much different fashion and will require, I think, civil society with institutions in place and democracy in place. So do I think that the outcome is going to be positive? No. Do I hope it's going to be positive? Yes. We are where we are. Let's give it a chance.
Okay. Also, as we meet today, Mort Klein, the president of ZOA, put out a press release. And the press release is predicated on his fear that Muslim extremism will in fact gain control in Egypt, and that if that happens, Egypt will abrogate its peace treaty with Israel. And Mort Klein is suggesting that if anything like that happens, Israel has the right from its side to annul any of the conditions of the peace treaty. And Israel will have a right to go back into the Sinai, where it gave up oil fields and airstrips. To what extent, when you see a Mort Klein write this, and by the way, Mort Klein is here often, and I have tremendous affection for him. This is not personal, but I am asking an intellectual question. When you hear something like this being said by Jewish leaders, we must now really worry that Egypt is going to abrogate its relationship to Israel. Is your reaction, Jack, that is a bit of Jewish hysteria, or do you believe it is rational Jewish thought which reflects a real possibility?
Well, first let me say, Mort Klein and I are friends. We were born in the same DP camp in Germany. We must have been handled by different nurses. We have different approaches to the problems of Israel and the world, you know.
But he's a passionate, wonderful man.
He's passionate. He's an important voice in the Jewish community, and I respect, you know, the fact that he works so eagerly, you know, hard and aggressively on behalf of the Jewish people. Look, 2011 is not 1979.
And you're referring to the revolution in Iran.
Yeah, and I think our approach, Israel's approach to it, you know, how it makes peace with the Arab world, you know, has to be in conjunction with how the world views Israel. And so, you know, our ability today, or Israel's ability today, to independently, single-handedly take action, as it may have done years ago, it did with the Iraq, you know, nuclear reactor, and it's done that many times. I mean, its ability is somewhat stymied. So I think it, you know, we can't just arbitrarily argue that Israel ought to engage in taking back the Sinai because somebody decided that the Camp David Accords, you know, are something that we now want to discard. The world community now is, as you can see at the UN and what's taking place even today, the world community is very much engaged in the peace process and what's going on in the Middle East and how it affects the worldwide community. And I think in that regard, I think Mort is wrong to argue that Israel, you know, single-handedly, independently ought to go and engage in any kind of procedure that, you know, might cause another war to break out or might cause a reaction on the part of the world community. I think it's got to be done in the right context.
Is the concern, we spoke a moment ago about what you think might happen in Egypt. The orientation that Mort is moved by really implies that there will be a Muslim takeover, an extremist Muslim takeover in Egypt. There are many people who are saying that it may not go democratic, especially Western democratic, but that it's not likely that Egypt will become an extremist Muslim state like Iran. To what extent is that your worry? To what extent do you worry that in, let's say, within 12 months, there will be extreme radical Muslim takeover in Egypt?
Look, I think all of us have to be extremely worried that that could happen. The Muslim Brotherhood, you know, is, you know, been on record as, you know, wanting to see the destruction of Israel. Many of the terrorist leaders, you know, Al-Qaeda and others have come out of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Including Hamas.
Yeah. So in Hamas, you know, so certainly, you know, we ought to be extremely
worried.
What
I hear, I don't know, and again, you know so much more than I do. I'm only reflecting the things I hear. What I am told is the Muslim Brotherhood is relatively small, a small percentage within Egypt, has not been able to gain traction in Egypt, and that Egypt has histories and traditions and a military which still wants American foreign aid, and for that it can't go Muslim extremist. And as a result, there's the suggestion that it's not likely that Muslim extremism will take hold in Egypt. You seem to really feel that that analysis is either short-sighted or simplistic, and that there is a real possibility of Muslim extremism gaining control in Egypt. Is that what you're saying?
Look, I'm not predicting what the probability of that is. I think that there is a danger, but I also think that Egypt does have a different history, a much secular history. I think the Egyptians see what happened in Iran, and I assume they don't want to see that happen. So I believe that we may not see the kind of democracy we want, but I don't think we'll see the kind of Islamic revolution we see in Iran. It'll be some hybrid. But look, no one wants to see that. But if you take a look at Israel's neighbors, they've got Hamas on one side, they've got Hezbollah on the other side, and they got Syria. And when you look at the borders between Syria and Israel, for example, it's been very, very peaceful.
As peaceful as it is between Egypt and
That's
Israel.
right. So, certainly none of us would want to see an Islamic republic next door that would be led by fanatics. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean the destruction of the state of Israel. It certainly means it questions the security of the state of Israel more so than a peaceful existence with Egypt. I think what we need to look at, though, to me, is the longer term, strategy. And in the longer term strategy, we need to find, some hope and some solution to the problem of the last 60 some odd years. And that's not going to come about by maintaining status quo, by keeping, a Mubarak in place. How do we get out of this cycle? I mean, it's not a good cycle for Israel to be in. What have we created in the Middle East? We've created Hamas. We've created, Ahmadinejad in Iran and
Who's
in the
we?
Middle East.
What do you mean we've created?
I guess I would say that the West has somehow been engaged with the Islamic world, with the Arab world, and the result of which is not something that I think we would think is successful. I mean, some of the examples I gave. So we've learned something from that, and Israel's learned something from that. But I think, for me, we need to take every possible, opportunity to change the course of the last 60 years. And to change that, it may take small steps, and it may take some risks. But I don't want my grandchildren, 50 years from today, sitting with, your children here in an interview, worried about, religious fanatics again destroying the state of Israel. What do we do about that?
What do we do, Jack?
Well, I think we need to approach the problems differently. I've said that, this is a historic opportunity, in a way, to change the dynamics. Before this Egyptian revolution, I've urged many of my friends in Israel and here to say that, the fact that the Middle East, for the most part, is united against Iran and concerned about Iran is an opportunity for Israel to play the game of negotiating for peace differently. That's been my advice. How you do it and, when you do it, I mean, I leave that up to the experts. But we have an opportunity here where much of the, Middle East, the Gulf states especially, who do the funding here, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, are united with Israel. Why not take that opportunity and see if you can make some hay out of that? As you know, and since you seem to look at my background or read it, I've traveled through much of the Arab world, and I've met with most of the leaders in the Arab world, from the King of Saudi Arabia to Gaddafi to others. I think this is one of those moments where Israel and much of the Arab world need each other in the struggle against Iran. So they need to find a platform for using that opportunity to negotiate the future of the Middle East.
And do you have even some suggestion for Israel? If you were in the Israeli cabinet, if you were the prime minister of Israel, is there one thing you'd like Israel to do, let's say vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia?
I would suggest to the Israelis that they put the maximum pressure on America and the American, currently certainly President Obama, to find ways that Israel and much of the Arab world can have a discussion and a dialogue.
You want them at a table together?
I don't know that I want them. I mean, we have not had a good history of them being at a table together.
So
or
what do you mean by
Napolis,
dialogue?
Madrid. Look, I think when you take a look at the Saudis, by example, and you take a look at the Israelis, they currently need America to protect them, or to provide a security blanket against Iranians and others. We have Pakistan that's exploding. Mm-hmm. We may find ourselves having to, use America to protect against, a Pakistani, government. And it seems to me that, I would put maximum pressure on America to find ways to bring, the two sides closer on how to define peace. Not only peace between the Palestinians and Israel, but peace between the Arab world and Israel.
You think there's a moment, this is a moment where that's possible?
It's a moment that's possible because of Iran. And we ought to make use of it. When I travel through the Arab world, I don't poll the citizens of the countries, but I think at the leadership level, I don't find that, any desire for anyone to engage in war with Israel. I don't even find that they are all that much concerned about the existence of the state of Israel.
How do they treat you as a Jew?
Usually quite well, always quite well. I believe I was the only Jew invited to Sheikh Mohammed, who runs the UAE, his son's wedding. And by the way, Arab wedding is similar to a Jewish wedding. Too much food and too many people.
Did you like Mubarak?
I'm not sure how to answer that exactly. I don't like dictators usually.
And did you view him as a dictator even before this revolution? Because that's never been the way the administration, and I'm not talking about just the Obama administration, for 30 years, he has not been presented to the American people as a dictator. He's been presented as a moderate statesman, and yes, there are extremes in some of the ways in which dissidents are treated in Egypt. But whenever we talked about a comprehensive peace, Mubarak was always there. Whenever we talked about the Gulf War, Mubarak was an ally. So that the sense that we had watching from afar was that he was basically an ally of the United States of America. As you met him personally, and I don't even know if it's fair to say to you, did you like him? I mean, who have I ever met I've never met anybody who knew Mubarak, who actually has been in a room with Gaddafi. It's so interesting, Jack, to be just with you. So I want to know, if I was with you, if you'd taken me along and we'd met Mubarak, would I have liked him? What would I have said to my wife when we came back? Would I have liked Gaddafi? Or is he a monster? Would I have liked these guys who run Saudi Arabia? Or would I think I'm in the 10th century? So that's one question, just asking you because you do know them, you have a sense of them. But then the question is, when you were with him, Mubarak, when you're with the king of Saudi Arabia, when you're with the Gaddafi, when you're with the king of Jordan, in your mind, are you saying whether I like them or not, these are despots and dictators?
Well, look,
and you got to give me something, because you understand that you have had experiences that none of us have had. So, again, without ever betraying a confidence, just give us a little feel here for what if we were all able to sort of travel behind you, and you would have said, Mr. Mubarak, this is Mark Golub from Shalom TV. What would we experience?
Well, look, although they have titles, pretty fancy titles, they're all individuals, and as we see, in everyday life, some individuals you befriend, some you get to know, so there are different relationships. Mubarak was more of a business type relationship. You'd have a discussion. He was an ally of America. He was supportive of a peace, even if you might call it a cold peace with Israel. He was very astute in understanding how to use the Jewish community and America to support his position of power and support buildup of his military. And I don't think he had any animosity towards Jews or Israel.
Okay.
And I use the word animosity because I'm not, Mort Klein might say here that they hate Jews. They might hate Jews, but
it's not what you experienced.
No.
But what is your wife's name?
Phyllis.
Did you ever go back to Phyllis and say, I can't believe we're dealing with Mubarak?
No. I think Mubarak was, look, if you ask me today, would I prefer Mubarak in power today as opposed to these new democratic forces being in power? I'd say yes, because I think it's a much more secure, Middle East and a much more secure Israel with Mubarak in power. I always use the word hope in the long run, but, I have to be honest that Mubarak is certainly a lot safer than what may be coming.
That's a very dramatic statement you just made.
Yeah.
It's a very dramatic statement.
Well, and most of us probably don't like making that kind of statement.
No.
We have, as Americans, we have values, and we believe in the freedoms that democracies provide for its citizens. But I have to say it because I'm concerned about the state of Israel, and we all know that they're under attack by everyone in their neighborhood. So Mubarak was going back to your question, was a personal relation. In other cases, I have very close relationships. They're friends. We sit in the living room together.
You ever played tennis with Gaddafi?
No, I've been in his tent for a long time, but I haven't played tennis. Gaddafi, again, Gaddafi has no love for the state of Israel. On the other hand, I don't know that he gets up in the morning thinking that it ought to be destroyed. I think he's got his weird kind of positions, which we all hear about. But he's a smart guy, and he does have, I think, a particular point of view of how the peace process maybe gets solved. We, as Jews, we won't like his point of view, but I never got the impression that on the top of his priorities was to eliminate the state of Israel. He gets along with Jews. I mean, many Jews still come back to Libya. There's a synagogue in Libya that they're going to actually, I understand, renovate. I'm not here to defend Gaddafi. I mean, he's done some awful things, and he's not a supporter of Israel, so I'm not here to defend him in any way, shape, or form. But I think it would be wrong for us to just assume that many of these leaders, are like Ahmadinejad, where their point of view is the destruction of the state of Israel tomorrow. I think they got bigger concerns than the destruction of Israel, and I think that that gives me some expectation that we can deal with them, because I think when you take a look at the sort of the menu of what they need to accomplish for themselves and their countries, I think the elimination of the state of Israel for most of them is pretty low. So I don't think we ought to get hung up on whether they love us or they don't love us, whether they're anti-Semitic or not. This is a business. This is the state of Israel that has to somehow, find its way to be accepted by the worldwide community as a Jewish state and be accepted in the Middle East as a Jewish state. How it gets there okay, are going to require, some negotiating and tools and hopefully no more wars. But if we're all going to sit back and take this position that, well, they hate us, and look at all the anti-Semitism, and look at the media, the anti-Semitic media, and look at the public statements, we ain't going to get anywhere. So we have to approach it differently. We just can't allow ourselves, to go back in time, to repeat the last 60 years, over the course of the next 60 years.
Because we made mistakes.
Well, we obviously, everybody make mistakes, but I don't know that we could have done it differently for the first 60,
Okay.
Plus years. But I think if we don't change and we continue to assume that we have to use the same tools to accomplish something in the next 60 years, we're doomed not to make any progress. At the American Council World Jewry, one of our agendas here is to try and get governments around the world to be some more supportive of the State of Israel.
Yes.
And we partner with the Jewish communities there, because those Jewish communities around the world now, are really becoming much more influential. I mean, the business leaders are more influential, the Jewish communities.
In which countries?
Certainly the former Soviet Union, Russia, that whole community.
Jewish businessmen are becoming more influential in the former Soviet Union.
Yes.
How interesting. What other countries? Any European countries?
No, European
No.
countries are a problem, but European countries are not going to be the countries that we necessarily have to worry about on the continuation of a secure Jewish state. I mean,
Although a lot of the efforts to delegitimize Israel comes out of Europe.
it does come out of Europe and institutions in Europe, but I think the bigger danger is coming from outside of Europe.
Okay.
And I think that we have to work on finding more friends who will support the State of Israel, and how do we achieve those results. Even if we lose some support within Europe, we need to somehow make up for that elsewhere. The UN is about votes, the Security Council is about votes. But when I take a look at the way we've approached defending the State of Israel in the last 60 years, I think we've been miraculously successful. Okay, we have gotten the support in Washington, something no one would ever expect it. But here we find ourselves with suddenly a world that's become more independent, certainly much less dependent than America. We sort of saw 3 Latin American countries support a Palestinian state. We have not, in American leadership, taken the opportunity to use the same kinds of tools that we use in America to get support for Israel, to support Jewish communities outside, and to do our own lobbying on behalf of Israel outside of America. And these countries, in Latin America, Africa, Asia, they're becoming independent of American policy, and I think it's becoming a bigger problem for the State of Israel. We're going to see some votes possibly in the UN that are dangerous for the State of Israel and the security of Israel. So, my point is that, we have this model in America, which is a very successful model, and we got to understand that, we now have to move that model elsewhere, because the world is now made up of, many countries, all of which have an independent stance and a vote. And it's not only American policy that will, be the decisive factor.
You've said a number of times that Israel must approach the next 60 years differently than its first 60 years. Can you give us 1 or 2 examples of what you mean?
Well, certainly the Palestinian, situation is the best of examples. I think we need to make sure that the Palestinians, not Hamas now, have economic opportunities and opportunities for their children to grow up and be well educated, and that there's economic development and democratic institutions built. We spent the first, not 60 years, but since we took over the West Bank, not developing democratic institutions because we had we never foresaw a Palestinian state, no economic development. And I think one of the things we ought to do in the next decade, let's say, is to make sure that those things do take place. So that's one example of how we do it differently.
And I want to make sure I understand. You would like to see Israel do more to help either Hamas itself or the people that Hamas deals with?
Not Hamas.
Okay.
I don't think we should do anything for Hamas.
Okay, you want to help the Palestinian people.
I think the Palestinian people, and there are some Palestinian leaders who taken that approach. Fayyad is the best example. I think we ought to help them develop their economy, help them develop their educational institutions.
Must there be peace before that, or should we do it across the board no matter what?
We should do it, and we've been doing it in recent years.
Yes.
I remember when, during Oslo, I said to President Clinton at the time, I said, I don't understand how you will maintain a peace accord or discussions to hopefully get to a peace accord if you don't develop their economies and don't give opportunity to the young children there. And that's finally starting to take shape. And what you've seen in recent years is at least the West Bank that has not been engaged in, intifadas and, terrorism against Israel in recent years. So that's one way of going, one change. I think that, in some of the Gulf states, there is certainly economic, trade going on between Israel and the Gulf states. They may not publicly acknowledge it, but there is. And Israel, I think, is working to expand that, and it's important that they do that. So these are things that in recent years, I think, have taken shape, and Israel is, I think the Israelis understand it, and they're doing that. They need to do more of all of the above, and Americans need to do more of all of the above. This is not, the natural outcome here is not going to be peace.
The natural outcome will not be peace.
No. So you need to force it.
Because?
Because because the Arabs, do not want Israel in its neighborhood. Because there is anti-Semitism.
But that said, you feel that?
I feel that in the end, we can find a Middle East where people want to live in peace, have economic opportunity, have their children grow up, in a peaceful existence, and be educated, and not always be engaged in war. And I think we have, we have to find leaders amongst the Arab world that will not use, this anti-Israel rhetoric as a tool for, propping up their power, which is one of the concerns you have today in Egypt. How does the new leadership that'll come in, how are they going to, support a peace process? After all, Egyptians are, do have a certain hatred for Jews, and as a new leader, can they come in and first one of their first policy positions will be to support Israelis? That's going to be a little bit hard. So the answer is that we have to create an environment in a world, and it's going to take some tough political leadership on the part of both the Arab states and Israel to find ways to do that. And I think America is going to be key to that.
I want to give you a chance to clarify, by the way. To what extent do you feel the lack of a peace settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians is Israel's failure?
Well, again, I know I keep harping on going back to this question of, an earlier period and a future period. I don't think that this is Israel's failure. I don't think you can assign failure to anyone that has terrorism on its border, that's attacking the children, of innocent children in Israel, and engaging in anti-Semitism. So to me, it's not Israel's failure. To me, the question is how do you put the past behind you and find a solution going forward? Will they be able to somehow get a new starting point? And how do they do that, and how can they politically, succeed at that? I mean, Israel politics is difficult. That is a big question. And to me, the reason that I draw this line of the before and after today is because of the events we've just seen in Egypt and Tunisia, because Ahmadinejad is getting nuclear capability and threatening the security of Israel, because Ahmadinejad is threatening many of the, leaders in the Arab world. So for me, it's a defining moment of looking at a history and a new set of factors of how you move forward.
I understand.
And smart leaders who can get away from the politics and get away from the fears ought to be able to give that a try. And it won't be easy to succeed. So to my Arab friends who I see, some of whom you mentioned, I tell them that you need to stop worrying about Hezbollah coming in because you may say something positive about the state of Israel, okay? And to my Israeli friends, I say you need to reach out to a community here who's trying to find a solution and doesn't necessarily believe in the elimination of the state of Israel, and find ways to have this dialogue. Not easy, politics don't make it easy. But there are things happening. I like to, I'm going to tell you a long story and you won't be able to show it all, but I think it sort of exemplifies a little bit of what the other side looks like.
Please.
Because I think to many Americans, this is a mystical group.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Jack.
So if you recall, last year, a Israeli female tennis player was not allowed to play in a tennis tournament in the Emirates. And some of us, tried and successfully convinced the Emirates, Abu Dhabi in particular, to allow the Israeli player to play. And there was a male Israeli player who did end up playing in the tournament. And I was sitting with Sheikh Mohammed, actually, in Abu Dhabi, in his living room. And my son was with me. I do let them touch upon this, activism sometimes. And he had his daughter, and I had my son, and the ambassador, his ambassador actually was there, his ambassador to Washington. And I said, Sheikh Mohammed, I'm glad you made the decision to allow the Israeli player to come. I said, and I want you to understand something. The reason that you got all this criticism in American media was not necessarily because you didn't allow a Jewish tennis player to come. I said, you were messing with American values. You did not allow a person to come because of their religion. And I said, that goes against American values. I said, and it wasn't a conspiracy by Jews to go to the media. I said, I'm not sure Jews, knew that much about it or cared about it. But when you mess with American value, I said, you get that kind of response and a lot of criticism. I said, you don't understand America. I said, we are a nation who, we send people to war every 10 years and we have thousands of soldiers die. And unfortunately, Americans sort of yawn. It's never part of the, political decision process in elections. Iraq War is an example. I said, but when you mess with their values, they kick up a storm. I said, look what we just did. I said, here we are, a country primarily of, of white folks, and we elected an African-American president. I said, it's unbelievable. No other country in the world would do anything like it. And I said to him, I turned to him, I said, it'd be like you naming me Sheikh Yaakov. And he laughed. Okay? And the point I was trying to make is we have two different worlds and two different cultures. He didn't appreciate American values, and he's a modern guy, Western educated. He didn't appreciate, you know, our deep instinct here to make sure that our values are upheld. He didn't appreciate necessarily, you know, that we elected someone who was not part of sort of the majority, you know, of Americans to be our president. And until I turned to him and said, you know, it would be like you naming me Sheikh Yaakov, it just didn't kind of hit home that, wait a minute, I can't do that, but America can. So, you know, we have a struggle here, which is, you know, a different culture in the Arab world than in the Israeli world and in the American world. Sheikh Mohammed was okay with allowing an Israeli tennis player to come eventually, but it had to be eventually. And there's going to be an eventually with the Sheikh Mohammeds of the world. Mm-hmm. We can make the eventually happen tomorrow, or try, or we can wait another 60 years.
But you believe it will happen?
I believe that it will happen, and it won't be a perfect world. They're not going to love us Jews, okay? Another side story, I was with the king of Saudi Arabia. At the time, he was Crown Prince Abdullah. And I went to visit, and we talked, and I think Barack was the prime minister, and they were talking about, you know, making some peace. You know, I think it was a time peace with the Syrians, and things were looking somewhat bright. And I turned to him then, and I said, well, let me ask you, if in fact there is peace between the Palestinians, Israelis, and Syrians, would you have, you know, relations with the state, you know, with the state of Israel? And he turned to me and he took his hand and he pounded it on his heart. And he says, no, he says, there have been too many years of hatred.
How interesting.
So that's true for him, but it's not true for the younger generation, some of whom have become good friends of mine. One of whom, again, an interesting side story, when President Clinton was first elected president, I got a call from one of them. I won't name names because some of these people are going to lose their jobs and maybe more. He called me up. He says, Jack, he says, why don't you ask the president if you can be ambassador to Saudi Arabia? I said, why are you asking a Jewish guy to be ambassador to Saudi Arabia? And he said, look, he says, you know the president. We need somebody as ambassador who can call up the president. I turned to him, I said, it's okay for a Jew to be ambassador? He says, yeah, sure, it's not a problem. So there are two worlds. There's the old world and the old history, true.
Fascinating.
And there's a new world and a new history.
And that's what gives you hope.
It gives me more than hope, it gives me expectation. But it's not expectation that we will have a perfect harmony. You know, we Jews like to have perfect harmony. We don't have perfect harmony in America. Okay, I mean, you know, we have our own problems in America.
And we don't have perfect harmony within the Jewish world either.
And even in the Jewish world. So, you know, I have an expectation that we will find, okay, a way to, have two peoples that work together. May not live together, but they'll work together.
I understand.
And they will cooperate together. I have an expectation that'll happen. I have concern whether there's the ability on the part of political leadership in America and in the Arab world and in Israel to make that happen sooner than later. And that's something that I drive, you know, for. I travel around the world quite often, trying to preach the gospel of, you know, why everybody should befriend the state of Israel and have relations with the state of Israel. And what I find is the willingness to do it, but not the political will to do it.
What's the difference? Why the willingness without the political will?
Well, because if you took away what they would perceive to be dangers in maintaining their power, political power, then I think they would do it. I mean, I can't tell you, you know, how many times I've had, you know, heads of state say, Jack, I want to go to Israel, you know, and, you know, I said, come. And then, you know, we plan on going, and then suddenly, you know, something happens. There's some outbreak of.
You're talking about an Arab leader who says no?
They could be African, Latin American,
Okay.
outside of Arab leaders won't go to Israel right now. They would be afraid
But you are
to.
talking about foreign leaders.
Foreign leaders, and then suddenly you find a difficult situation, in the Middle East, or a vote coming up at the UN, and suddenly it's not politically possible for them to go to Israel. I have that right now with the head of one state in Africa, where he wanted to go. We were arranging for it. He got a letter of invitation. This is not the moment to do that. Why? Because, there's no peace negotiations going on. There's UN resolutions flying around. This is not a time for him to do that. But he wants to do that. I would tell you that, I find that more often than not. I find Muslim leaders, outside of the Arab world, also who are proud to be friends with, the Shimon Pereses of the world. They brag about it, but politically they don't find the willpower to do it. So anyway, how do we overcome that? Can we get the leadership, around the world to somehow look at the future differently and take some risks differently? It's hard. I mean, we have too many forces who are fighting that. I mean, Mort Klein, who I love, is somebody who just wouldn't accept that as a change of policy. And there are too many, I think, people in all these countries, including in America, who I just don't think have the guts to go about this differently.
Jack, we have to pause just for a moment and then we will continue. That was part one of our meeting with Jack Rosen, chairman of the American Council for World Jewry. We hope you enjoyed hearing what he had to say. As always, I invite you to be in touch with us with any thoughts or comments you may have to the ideas expressed by Jack Rosen. Please email me or write me this week, or be in touch through Facebook or Twitter. I look forward to hearing from you. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.